is a summary of what I want to share with you tonight. I'm glad I have a written version. So there's a wonderful line in Pirkei Avot, chapter 1, number 6, where it says, Aseh lecha rav, kene lecha chaver, veheve dan ekol adam lachaf zechut. So one by one. Aseh lecha rav is very, it's such a strange thing because you would think it would say, find a rabbi, not make a rabbi, not like the golem, where you take some, like God creates a human being and, like in uh, Iron Man, you put the beating heart into it. What does it mean? Asel lecha rav, make a rav. So I was explaining this and I said, the connection between a person and a mentor, a spiritual authority, um, the affect is reverence. If there's not reverence, it's not a Rav, it's an instructor. But the moment there's the affect of reverence, it means that your depth is matching their depth. And whatever is communicated, it's over the wavelength of depth, whatever the content is. Um, I'll always be reminded when I had the uh, I'll say the courage to ask Leonard Cohen why he chose me as his rabbi. You know what? And he said, "You're a healer." It's the last thing I expected. It sounds very new agey to me, but and he said, "It's not what you say." He said, "It's what's communicated when you say things." It really had a deep effect on me. So Leonard made me his rabbi because he was willing to, I think it's in his nature, to hear my inner voice. The center of the Kabbalistic system is called Tiferet, beauty. Emet, truth, is also called Kol, voice. Um, just as the lowest sphira is called uh, words or dibur. Um, so the inner voice is the voice before words. And and he sat down and we were on the same wavelength. And he was deeply grateful. And as we talked, I said to him, it's all from a broken heart. I mean, everything I teach is tried and tested, uh, through a fractured heart. I don't teach anything that's not true. I would be ashamed of myself. I mean, there are sometimes I arrived to the pulpit with silence because I didn't have anything true in my heart to say. So if I don't find a truth, then I'm not going to say it. Um, I feel like many people. Uh, Ani Bizir Antin. I'm like the small version of great artists who have a muse, a musa, and sometimes I felt, sometimes even here online and certainly in front of people, that as I'm trying to speak from my heart, as if the muse comes in and says, all right, you're speaking from your heart. You're on the wavelength of truth. I'm just going to get in there and say what I need to say, and I'll use you as my vessel. I think all of you who are therapists, counselors, psychologists, teachers of depth, I think that's what you're doing. You're communicating a truth on the wavelength of whatever it is you're teaching. And I think all of us who've had deep conversations with other people, I know sometimes in a counseling session, I think to myself, what I say next has to be exactly right. And I go on this strange journey of feel the truth and then find the most precise way to say it because everything depends on this moment. I have that very strong existential sense that this could be the thing they're looking for. My life will go down this path or this path. I want to share with you an anecdote. I was counseling a man whose a wife, I will say, was objectively, annoying to horrible. I'll tell you the story. You can pick the spectrum. And he keeps saying he wants to kill her. Yeah, I'd like to kill her. I'd like to kill her. So I thought deeply. I thought, okay, let's work that out. He said, what do you mean? I said, you want to kill her? Like I was a Marine. I can, like, let's work it out. Where are you going to do it? Because I don't know. I said, driveway when she gets home. What weapon are you going to use? He said, I never thought about that. I said, 22 caliber revolver. So, the shell doesn't land on the driveway. You won't be able to find it. So it holds in. Small shot, you put it right behind the ear, a 22 will do the job. I said, okay, can you imagine it? And he's starting to shake. I said, and the next day, you're gonna have to tell your sons, you're gonna be at the funerals, and you'll live with it the rest of your life, that because she annoys you, you chose to take a human life. So if you're gonna kill her, let's plan it. If not, stop talking like that. He goes, okay, okay, I'm off. Okay, I'm off of killing anybody. But he would work himself into a rage. And I just said, don't use metaphors. Now you're not a doormat, you know. Uh, that's one of my favorite. What did Neanderthals say when they felt like a doormat? Because they lived in caves, as far as we know, or something. So I said, be responsible for your words. Quit talking like that in front of me. You're not going to kill anybody. And don't even think it. Like, what is going on there? I'm outraged. I feel so taken advantage of. I feel so disrespected. I said, that's way better than saying I'm going to kill somebody. So I remember when I looked at him, I thought to myself, should I do this? Should I actually take him on the journey of feeling the grief and shame and guilt of murder to snap him out of this bravado that he's going to kill somebody? So it seemed to work. I've never done it before, and I've never done it since. But it seemed to be what he needed. Anyway, so what is the Rav? Now I'll put the Rav now as a kind of in a kind of a paradigm during the high holidays. Aselach harav means turn the Yamim Noraim into a Rav. Now, what does it mean that it's your Rav, your rabbi? It has some kind of spiritual, moral authority over you. You've brought yourself there, so you get on the wavelength of, let's say, Rosh Hashanah. And if we can imagine Rosh Hashanah as having consciousness, then Rosh Hashanah is trying to teach you because you've made Rosh Hashanah your Rav. Therefore, you have to know enough about Rosh Hashanah to construct, to make, lasot, to make a spiritual teacher. Now, where do we get this knowledge from? Well, there are lots of introductions to the high holidays. I think the Bible has very little. The Bible, the word Rosh Hashanah only occurs once in the Bible, and it's referring to what we would call Yom Kippur on the 10th of Tishri. So there's nothing in the Bible. All it says is on the first day of the seventh month, you shall uh, sound the shofar. We don't have much information. The rabbis actually built the holiday. So if you like to type in your AI, how do the rabbis of the Talmud and Midrash talk about Rosh Hashanah? You'll get a pretty detailed report. We say, would you like more? Would you like less? Would you like it more theological, more popular? I say, wow, you're pretty good, right? Almost great, but you're on the cusp. So you can learn a lot with AI. I do. I use AI all the time to summarize things for me. And then, now that you know all about it, remember the four steps? History, Rosh Hashanah, almost nothing. Ritual, the main ritual is listen to the sound of the shofar, and the liturgy. Read over a high holiday prayer book. Third level is the symbolic meaning. The great symbols, of course, are the shofar and the courtroom. And then when you ingest the shofar and the courtroom, the uh, transformative dimension, the ritual dimension, the historical, ritual, symbolic, transformative. That's what my teacher taught me, and I teach you. So that's a good way to start. Is when Rosh Hashanah is speaking to us over the horizon, speaking to us from the future, as it were. Um, you have a conception of what this spiritual being looks like. There's a teacher over the horizon trying to teach you something. Now, the main message for me, because one of the images of Rosh Hashanah is the coronation of the king, the coronation of the divine. It goes back to an ancient mythological tradition um, that every year the gods have to be recoronated. And the rabbis knew that it came from ancient mythology, but they used it anyway. The God, Melech HaYoshev al Kisei Ram V'Nisa, the king sitting on his raised and elevated throne. So once a year, it's as if we have to coronate the king. It's in my mind it's a focus day where we work on that there is a spiritual and moral order to the universe. There is a spiritual and moral order to the universe. Now, once you say that and you feel it acutely, then for, let's say, the month of Elul going into Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, that's a guiding thought. And part of this moral order, by the way, I think is the realm of truth. Like the guy who said, I want to murder my wife. That wasn't true. All it took me with it 5 minutes. He was ashamed of himself. That wasn't true. That was an emotion, but it had no truth to the statement. And so many things that people say, look out in the world news, they're not true. They're just factually not true. I had a debate. Yes, I go to a bookstore on Fridays, and there's a guy there who's just cantankerous. And we start to talk, and I realized, oh, and he we call it Ipcha Misabra. The guy who always wants to say the opposite. So we start to talk. I said, look, I don't debate facts, right? If you want to do it, he says, well, this was created for this. I said, I said, it's just factually not true. And I really don't want to talk about it anymore. Like one, two, three, we're done. And this was a guy, whatever one said, he would make up an opposite because he likes to argue and to, and he's a professor, so he's oftentimes right. But I only choose things that that I think I know more than he does about. And he doesn't care about the truth. You know, he wants to sword fight and stab people. And let's see, you know, I say I'm happy to sword fight with you, but we're not going to sword fight over facts, interpretation. And so for example, so I would say I really try to live in a moral and spiritual framework, and one of them is the distinction between a fact and, you know, an evaluation of what the facts mean. Now, many people speak facts through metaphors. They speak facts through metaphors. For example, genocide in Gaza. Did you read the headline that 200 Holocaust scholars have decided it's genocide? The Jerusalem Post exposed that to get in this organization, you pay a $30 fee and you are a Holocaust scholar. Now, when they reported that, you know, headline New York Times, you didn't know that it's a sham, that it's fake. Did that reporter know? Did the reporter investigate? Who are these people? How do you get in? Pay a $30 fee and, you know, something. And they said the number of Holocaust scholars has increased tenfold since October 2023. Wow, like all these PhDs in Holocaust studies, like all in 1 year. So, you know, people say to me, what about the famine? I said, there's been a famine in Gaza going on for 20 years. Every year I read about the famine in Gaza and the blockade in Gaza. No one's died yet. And they talk about the genocide. I said, taught the Holocaust. I taught the genocide in Rwanda. I said, I know what Holocaust looked like. Um, so I said, you know, an Israeli acquaintance said to me, you know, Retzach Am, it's a murder of people. I said, like, we're both Jews. We remember Babi Yar, you know, in our cultural memory, lining 100,000 people up and machining gun them. They're falling into ditches. I said, is that what you're talking about? No, I said, what exactly do you mean by the murder of a people? Well, Tzahal is not as careful as they could be. Look, it goes from genocide to the Israeli army is not as careful as they could be. I said, well, that's a whole different tune. I said, look, I know in your group you say things like Netanyahu's a fascist and you know, there's a genocide in Gaza. I know that's the way you guys talk. But when you talk to me, you got to speak not metaphors, but facts. If you present it as a fact, you have to back the fact up with evidence. If you want to say, here's the evidence and here's my interpretation, that's one thing. But don't skip the part where you pay attention to facts. That's part of what it means to live in a world where there's a moral and spiritual authority. You're entitled to your opinions, but I think from a Jewish values perspective, your opinions ought to be rooted in the factual world as much as we can discover the facts. Now, how do you discover the facts? Let's look at the Talmud again. Find someone who disagrees with you and engage in respectful debate. That's how would you find the facts. If you only talk to your echo chamber, you're never going to get the facts. And I love it that the Talmud has a sense of machloket, that machloket, sustained debate for the sake of heaven. The truth emerges from the sustained encounter of two people with different conceptions of the truth, respectfully engaged in conversation, and the truth emerges. which is one of my greatest favorite 20th and 20th century philosophers, Jürgen Habermas. He has a whole theory of communicative discourse, and that's what this is, a kind of a discourse, where he compares it to psychoanalysis, that the truth is discovered by talking. And some truth are discovered by people talking with each other. And instead of saying, I'm right, I'm here to persuade you, I'm here to engage with you so the truth can emerge between us. So that's my approach. When a person wants to claim something to be true, I said, are you trying to persuade me? Or are we going to together arrive to the truth? I'll listen to you, you listen to me, and we'll discover this as we go along. Now, uh, this idea is rarely observed, in a politically fractured society because no one actually wants to take the time on one side or the other, right? Like to find somebody on the other side that says, "Would you like to, engage with me in this truth-seeking expedition into the heart of darkness?" They said, "No, I have my truth. I don't need to go on a safari for truth. I own the truth." Okay, all right. So you own the truth, and I've been living this way almost my entire adult life. I'm more sophisticated at teaching it. So the Rav of the Yamin Noraim, first of all, there's something called a spiritual and moral truth. Okay. Now, in this time for me is the truth of my life. I have to continually review my life because I have entrenched, as it were, positions. And as I wrote in my email, I want to go back and review what I think about myself and others and what happened because it might not be true. It might not be true. So as I get older, doing pretty intense spiritual work for 50 years, more than 50 years. I began with my high school teacher, Jack Bishop, when I was in 11th grade. Um, every year, there's more truth to be discovered. And I know I feel it intensely because there's a spiritual being just over the horizon. And when saying something like, when you arrive in this courtroom on the first day of Tishri on Rosh Hashanah, you better have your thoughts organized. Because when you swear to tell the truth, I expect the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Because I watch YouTube clips of judges really giving it to unruly people. Not in my courtroom. You know, God says, "You're going to arrive to my courtroom. You better have the truth ready, right? Don't lie and don't make me draw it out of you." So I have this image that I have a court date on the first of Tishri, and I'm preparing for court. I'm going to say the truth. When I take the stand to swear to tell the truth, I will say the truth because I've worked at the truth. So I want to recommend that to you. When the metaphors of Rosh Hashanah is the courtroom, you're going to have to swear to tell the truth. Now, there is a moral and spiritual authority that requires the truth. Now, why do I say a spiritual authority? For example, grieving. Grieving is real. Our hearts get crushed, our hearts get shattered. We don't know how we're going to survive it, but there is a spiritual truth that whether you can work it through or not, we have a commandment to try to work it through. You can't say, well, this happened to me, I'm grieving, I'm going to stay right here. There's a spiritual truth in our tradition, I think in all spiritual traditions, that say it's not good enough. You're wounded, that's a fact. Grieving is a spiritual fact. There's also spiritual truth that you just can't allow yourself to stay there. At some point, you have to say to yourself, I'm going to go to a place deeper than what happened to me. There's always a stratum of depth, deeper than the wound. So that's what I mean by spiritual and moral truths. I'll be talking about this during this entire season. So Aselach Harav, um, uh, meaning I will make this high holiday into my Rav. Rabbi Manny, you have a comment?
Yeah, that was so wonderful, Rabbi. And it goes right back to what you mentioned before about Ms. Havisham,
Mm-hmm.
because of course she couldn't get past anything.
Right.
And I think the problem with a lot of people who are mired in their grief is that they feel that if they move beyond it somehow, that it's a betrayal of the person that they're grieving. And
That's
that
exactly
is
right. Yeah.
that's a really difficult problem for a lot of people who feel that way. Um, what you're quoting from Pirkei Avot, as you're talking about it tonight, I'm looking at it in a completely different way because the three verbs that are in that statement are make, create, and be. It's
Mhm,
not judge everyone favorably. It really is
mhm,
kind of a strange
mhm.
sentence where it says,
Yeah, I think
be
I'll get to that. It's a very strange locution, and it's actually Aramaic.
right. And so that's such a wonderful progression for all of us, especially this time of year. Make, create, and then be. If it's something
Yeah,
that's worthy, if
yeah.
it's something that really reflects the truth and who you want to be, if you're courageous enough to do it, go ahead and make, create, and then be that. And that
So
takes tremendous
th-
courage.
that's a wonderful teaching, and thank you so much for sharing that with us. It's wonderful. So when I summarize that, I will come back and quote your teaching. Okay. Um, so Asela Harav, remember, I'm saying you wanted to say find a teacher. That's easy. It's not so easy, but it's easier than make a teacher, which means it's your responsibility. You don't find a teacher who's a static thing on the horizon that you just arrive in the classroom. You make the teacher by getting on the wavelength of the teaching. So if you want Rosh Hashanah to be your teacher, your rabbi, you got to get on the wavelength that there's a moral and spiritual authority. And part of the moral authority is the world of truth. Okay, now it's the second one that I will delve into much more deeply as we go along. It says, Kaneh lecha chaver. Now we're going to get a little bit into Hebrew linguistics. The Hebrew word kana does mean purchase or acquire. For example, in a marriage, it's called kinyan. Uh, you know, the male, and I will be egalitarian, the male and the female, or male, male, female, female, whoever is doing this, they were, as it were, acquiring each other as their soulmate. They're saying, you are now officially, you'll forgive the language, mine. I'm yours and you are mine. I am my beloved and my beloved is mine. So that happens. That's the core of the ceremony. And we call it shayachut, is belonging. So there is a spiritual sense of acquire. However, there's a homonym, same letters, that means create. So God is called Koneh Shamayim Va'aretz, not the acquirer of heaven and earth, but the creator of heaven and earth. So the idea that in the Hebrew language there are homonyms, they're spelled exactly alike, but they come from two different semantic traditions. Now, how could this possibly be? Remember, these languages were all oral. Alphabet came later. And people who wrote an alphabet were approximating how words sounded. I've done enough research to say I think I got it, that the word kana as acquired, we would have to go back to Akkadian roots, Proto-Semitic roots, and try to imagine that it sounded a certain way. Then you go back with the word kana, which means create, and back in the history of Semitic languages, they may have sounded a bit different. And then you get to the late stratum, because Hebrew is a late Semitic language. And they say, wow, they sound exactly alike. Well, write them alike. Well, how do they know the difference? Because this clearly is acquire and this clearly is create. Are you sure they won't confuse? Oh, come on, people are not dummies. Well, it turns out that people are dummies. Okay? Kana means acquire, kana means create. So in Pirkei Avot 1:6, it says, acquire a friend. Okay, and then but if you look at the other meaning of kana, which is create, it's a parallel of aseh. Create a friend. Okay. Now, I'm not saying the idea of acquire is a bad idea because it's at weddings, but creating a friend is parallel to making a rabbi. Creating a friend is like I'm the sculpture, right? I'm sculpting this friendship, and they're sculpting this friendship. Then I'm reading Rumi, where he has a tradition of the inner friend. I also found it in a poem by the great Jewish Neoplatonic philosopher named Ibn Gabirol, where a lot of his poetry is written in a dialogue form, and it's it's the kind of Hebrew that that Israelis would not be able to comprehend it because He's in many ways inventing literary Hebrew, in the golden age of Spain. He's an Arabic speaker, so he's taking. I think he's well versed in Arabic literature, and he's looking at it and say, well, we have that root in Hebrew, but I don't hear people using it who know Hebrew. People wrote poetry. We don't know if there were groups who spoke Hebrew. So in many ways, he's one of those who are actually creating literary Hebrew. So it's very challenging Hebrew. But as I worked through the poem, I said, well, wait a minute, I know that root. I just gotta, go to the Israeli Academy of Languages and look it up. And he's a master. Solomon ibn Gabirol. They say he's a great Neoplatonic philosopher. He wrote a book called Mikor Chaim. They didn't know he was Jewish because the Latin translation is Fons Vitae, the source of life. Um, and as far as I recall, they've lost the Hebrew. They have the Latin because everybody thought he was a Christian philosopher. They discovered it was Shlomo ibn Gabirol. So again, I could be incorrect here. You have to check me out. The Fons Vitae was back translated into Hebrew, Mikor Chaim. Now, what I've discovered, because of my studies and my tutor, he was also a fabulous poet. I knew that. He said, "Who's Salmi ibn Gabriel? Great philosopher and poet of the golden age of Spain. Genug, enough." And now that I'm reading it, he has this fantastic idea of the Chaver, as does Rumi. There's an inner companion, like Socrates, Diotima, when they fight, says, like, where are you getting all this information from? Uh, Diotima, who's she? She's my teacher. Tell us more about it. No. So all we know is, again, if I remember this correctly, Socrates had a teacher named Diotima. Now, it could have been his spiritual friend, could have been an actual, the great unknown philosopher of you know, of ancient Greece. But try to imagine you have an inner friend who's watching you. Now, I've had that, but I never called it a friend. It was a light of consciousness. Well, in Shlomo Ibn Gabirol, in Rumi, and in other traditions, it's a personality. It's like a muse. Rumi says is at the heart. So I try to think of things kind of like the light is upstairs looking downstairs. He says it's the heart. It's the touchstone. It's where you know your presence. So in the Hebrew book on Rumi that I'm studying, he says that the chaver is a hit rachavut, is an expansion into presence. Hit rachavut le nochachut, an expansion into presence. So when you're aware of the friend, everything expands, presence expands because the friend, one line from the Rumi poem is, when you're with me, it says, when you're not with me, you're not with anybody. When you're with me, you're with everybody. Become everybody. So it's a kind of a grand statement, but if your spiritual friend is not present, you're not with anybody. You're like an imitation human being. You're a poster. Uh, and when you're with me, you are truly with others. And then he exaggerates it, and you are with everybody. But I think he means is when you find that spiritual presence, that expansion of presence. He has many more things that he says in the poem that again, I'm reading a Hebrew translation. I'm not quite ready to translate the Rumi live to you. My English translation, Coleman Barks, is still in our container, which we have not unpacked yet. So I don't feel like buying another one when I know I have it. But so I'll translate the Hebrew translation of Rumi from the Persian to Hebrew, and I'll translate the Hebrew into English and share with you. But it's a very, very powerful idea, that there is an observing presence within us that watches everything. And what Rumi and Ibn Gabirul are saying is talk to your friend, right? Talk to your inner friend, um, and let that inner friend be the touchstone of truth. So the best translation I would come up with would be an inner angel. An angel meaning an emissary of God sent down into the soul of every human being to be our touchstone for the truth. So again, in reading Pirkei Avot, Kaneh lecha chaver, that certainly means sculpt your friendships. Don't leave them to be accidental and kind of random. Let events take over. Uh, but because I'm studying Ibn Gabirol and Rumi, the idea of the inner friend, uh, it tells me that every single person attending here has the capacity to shape, coax, evoke that inner friend. Maybe you don't believe it, but again, we'll say beliefs are minimally metaphoric, meaning metaphors for reality. And therefore, just try to imagine that there's a presence watching you, observing you, saying, you could have been more truthful. You could have been kinder. You could have been more courageous. And you turn and say, I'd love to hear what you have to say. And even Gabirol has dialogues between the person and his, I forget if he calls it, I don't think he calls it a friend. I'd have to go back and review the Hebrew. All right, so that's Aselach HaChaver. And for me, this has been part of my high holiday preparation is, you know, um, instead of thinking the inner light, which I'm used to since I was 16, I want to use the idea of the inner friend, the older friend, who's watching you and not hostile. They're your friend, but they just want you to rise into the fullness of your moral and spiritual character. Like, well, that wasn't exactly good what you did or how you said it. Okay, so that's the uh, um, K'neh lecha chaver, create the inner friend. So you have to do your part to what I said is evoke the inner friend and coax the inner friend into your life. Justin, hey.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hey.
Um, so can you give a little bit more to talk about the difference between the Yetzar Tov and then what you're talking about this evening? Because it seems like
Yeah.
Yetzar Tov is very close to um, the inner Rav that you're talking about.
Yeah. All right, I've studied these ideas carefully, and I think the Yetzer Tov is a superfluous idea. I'll tell you why. If I have a Yetzer Hara and a Yetzer Tov, who am I? I'm the guy up here who's going to decide between Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara. Okay? Now, I think because the Bible only talks about the Yetzer Hara. It says Kol Machshavot Libo Rak Ra Kol Hayom in Genesis um, chapter 6, verse 1, 2, and 3. It doesn't say we have a Yetzer Tov. Why? Because the neshama is the the power orientation toward the good. We all have a neshama. It says in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, that God breathed into the human beings and he became a nefesh chaya, a living nefesh, a living soul. That's our authentic nature. The breath of God is within us. When I was young, I heard a New Age teacher say something that I love. When we breathe in, God breathes out. When we breathe out, God breathes in. That's not what the Bible says, but I love the image. But Genesis 2:7, Vayipach be'apav, and God blew into the human being a breath, a nishima. So try to imagine when it says Ner Adonai Nishmat Adam, the light of God is the breath of the human being. That's literal translation of Proverbs 20:27. But neshama means breath of God, and it also means the soul or spirit. So that's your identity. That's your true, deepest, authentic self. What happens is the Yetzer Hara interferes. So if there's a Yetzer Tov, it's because I've connected to my neshama, and I'm fighting against the Yetzer Hara. I guess I could call I'm activating a Yetzer Tov, but because I'm so deeply invested in this world of neshama and the spoiler. Neshama, the soul spirit, and the contrarian force of the Yetzer Hara. Like, I'm going to get in the way. So I don't think of a Yetzer Tov. I think my neshama is a force of good. So I don't use the word Yetzer Tov. So that being said, now you can see the connection between, pardon me, the chaver and the neshama. You could say your neshama, the chaver, is sorry for this philosophic term, the instantiation, meaning you're taking the neshama and you're making it an and making it into an instance. Um, or you're taking something deep and you're creating it into a kind of a tangible metaphor. That seems fair, but remember, when I speak spiritually, I don't like to reduce things because that's it's too scholarly. Well, the chaver is only, that nothing but the nothing buttery. It's nothing but, I think they call it I'm going back to my philosophic training. It's a hypostasizing of the neshama. I said, no, it's not. It's actually my friend. It's like, I don't want to reduce everything to the nothing but the nothing buttery. If you say, oh, chaver is it's nothing but this, I think you're denying the experience of an inner chaver that says, I'm coming with affection. I'm coming to you with love. You can do better. So, kanen lecha chaver. Sherry, I see your hand. Let me just finish the next line, and then I'll come back for your insight. Now, heve dan et kol ha'adam lachaf zuchut. This is the Aramaic heve dan. Heve is from the Aramaic to be. So it says be judging. All right. Now, dan is connected to the word din, which also means justice. It also means logic. It also means good thinking. So the word din and dan is like English. You can say judge yourself. You can say good moral judgment. It's a very wide word. So heve dan et kol ha'adam. That's deep because it says heve dan kol adam. You know, be dan every person. Heve dan et kol ha'adam. The all of the person, everything about them, even the parts that hurt you, even the parts that 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 wounded you, even the parts that aren't their best part. This is called empathetic understanding. When I work with myself, I think to myself, okay, I was objectively wronged. They slapped me. There's red on my face from their hand. Okay, it's my interpretation, it's my subjective experience. No, no, actually, it actually happened. They did a bad thing. I don't like this idea of trying to, kind of level everything out. There are things that happen to me that are not my interpretations, not my narrative. People actually actively hurt me. I say, okay, okay, good. I got that. Now what? Now what? I'm a victim. I can go through that. And then I say to myself, I'm more than a victim. I'm the guy who dealt with it. So let me focus that. And then empathetic understanding. What must their life be like? That their entire life came to a moment where the most reasonable thing to do was hurt another person. Their whole life came to that moment. They said, okay, in light of all my life, of all my trauma, all my thoughts, all my suffering, all my loves, all my losses, today I will hurt another person. It's the sum of their life. Now, I want to cry. I think to myself, that's what your life came down to? That at that day, at that moment, the entire trajectory of your life came down to willfully and unconscientiously wounding another human being. Man, I feel sorry for the person. And I don't mean it in some, hackneyed, corny sense. My heart really is suffering for a person that their entire life story came down to, I will hurt another human being today. I'm filled with grief. I'm filled with loss. So when I heve dan et kol ha'adam, the entire human being, lahaf zuchut, um, I'm not going to say they're innocent. I'm going to say at some point, and the rabbis say, when you do bad things, it's a ruach shtut. It's a shtut is a mistake. It's a ruach shtut. A mistaken spirit came in and control of them. There's a better person in there. So, first of all, you know, judge people favorably until you have all the facts. Don't judge people. And that goes, to the processing and reasoning with people. Don't assume you have all the truth until you hear their side of the story. Nicha, that's incredible. So many people do not do that. That's called a moral truth, and many people know it and ignore it. They say, "Yeah, you're right. I know there's another side." I've actually had people say to me, they present something to me and say, "Rabbi Finley, there can be no other side. This is so clear." I said, "Unless it was a physical act that you can show me that you could have shown me on a video camera, okay, right? So there's no doubt, you know, that they hit you in the head, okay. However, if you're remembering a conversation, you might be wrong. You really might be wrong. So what do? Say to the person, say, I remember a conversation. I could be wrong. How do you remember that conversation? And they're going to say something that is completely unfamiliar to you. And then you say, so interesting. I recall it differently. Would you like to hear my recollection? Now, what do you have? Communicative discourse. Here's my recollection. Here's your recollection. Let's try to square this as much as we can. But to go into that conversation, you have to be willing to sacrifice the moral high ground of being the victim. Now, let's say objectively the person says, yes, I said that and I did that, and I really apologize. Have you had that happen where a person says, I own it? I own it. You're right. I did say those things and it was an egregious, terrible thing, and I truly apologize to you. Okay, I guess you would call that some kind of compensation. They apologized and they admitted it. Now, what do? I can say, thank you for your apology. I really appreciate it, which I've done. And then other days I've sat and thought to myself, their entire life got summed up in that moment. How tragic. I, I don't think I've done a lot of intentional mean things to people, but there are times when I think to myself, wow, my sum of my life came to that moment, and that's not what the sum of my life is. So heve dan et kol hadam lachaf zuchut. Now, what is the kaf zuchut? I do a lot of research on scales this week. Okay, so what do you call the two little cups on a scale? Well, apparently is called a measuring pan, a measuring pan, uh, right? And so what do? You have the scales of justice, and you say this is the scale of guilt and the scale of innocence, the heavier cup. Load the cup, right, into the cup of, I got my hands are backwards on the screen. Load the cup into the cup of innocence. Load the cup. They might not have wronged me. Or load the cup. What a tragedy that that's where their life ended up. So heve dan et kol adam lechaf zechut. Load zechut, merit, innocence, in the cup, and then see the world through this lens. Now, again, I'm not Pollyannish. It's a better way to go. It's a way better way to go. Number one, seek the truth, pursue the truth. You might be wrong. That's a pretty good way to go. An even deeper way to go is understand that most people's hurtful deeds come from some kind of inner pain, inner distress, inner misery that we can't fathom. Most. There are evil people, but most of the people we meet are not evil, right? They're living unbearable lives, and their toxicity flows out to another. All right, so I want to share with you two things. Number one, I'm really taking High Holidays seriously. Hope you can see that I'm letting the Rav of the days of our reach into me and saying, come to court prepared, Rosh Hashanah. I'll talk about Yom Kippur's once I get through Rosh Hashanah. It's always different. And therefore, everything I study in Rumi or Shlomo Ibn Gabirol or the Bible, everything is getting me ready for my court date, including my reading of Pirkei Avot. By the way, I could go through the entire first chapter of Pirkei Avot and give you a high holiday interpretation of the entire first chapter and part of the second chapter of Pirkei Avot. Maybe I'll do that on Rosh Hashanah. All right, so I want to inspire you to read Pirkei Avot. It's not beyond you. Not every mission is going to be meaningful to you. That's okay. You can say not for me and go to the next one. And then try to imagine it's there to help you for your court date where God's going to look at you and say, only the truth. Only the truth. Don't come into my courtroom unprepared. So try to imagine everything you're studying, everything you're doing is preparing you for your court day. I ended my email by saying, the story of your life, there might be a new moral hero. And I truly can feel transformation taking place within me. I can feel the refinement of my character. I hope it lasts. It's a murgash. It's felt within me. All right, that's my message for tonight. I know.